Hi, everybody. Welcome again to another fabulous session. My good friend Mark will be joining us shortly. But I wanted to take this time to read some ground rules. This group is pretty respectful and we usually, get along really well, but I just wanted to formally read through some things, try to make it brief. This is a positive, safe space for autistic people, many of whom have PTSD from lifelong clashes with neuronormative culture. Again, there are kind and respectful ways to share needs and concerns. If someone starts to criticize an individual or a topic of the session or otherwise becomes antagonistic, you will be ejected from the session and from our social media platforms. We now follow a format where our session facilitators share, and then we have a group discussion. Autistic voices come first. Please allow autistic people to engage. And then we will have probably some extended pauses to make sure that everybody who needs to formulate their thoughts has a chance to share if they want to. And then we will also cue allies after autistic people have fully engaged. Some people communicate primarily through writing, and we want autistic people to be able to communicate efficiently. So please respect the chat feature, especially with so many people attending. Please raise your hand or use the raised hand icon if you want to offer comment or experience, and please try to keep your comments to about a minute so we can respectfully share the floor. We don't want to silence anyone, but we want to give everybody a chance to be heard. We're starting some support groups so that people have a place to share their struggles and triumphs. So we ask that people respect the time and effort of the facilitator who has put in a lot of work for their subject that they're sharing. Because autistic minds are relational and anything we can say that we say can rightly be considered relevant, we'll just have to refine as we go along. And one last request, that people please put themselves on mute when they are not speaking, since we have a lot of auditorily sensitive people, including myself. Also, I have a hard time reading the chat. I have to either watch and listen or read, and I generally choose to watch and listen. So I'm relying on Roger to keep track of the chat comments. So with that, is our guest speaker here, or should we just
Let
wait?
me see. Oh, he just popped in the waiting room, so I'm letting him in right now.
Great. Hey, Mark. Do you have your camera on and your mute button off, Mark? Is he in, Roger?
Let me see. He saw him in, and I let him in, but let me see if he's
Okay.
made it in. Ah, there he is.
Oh, here we go. Here we
Oh, here,
go.
yeah, I was frantic. I couldn't get the link to work.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Okay,
it
you're
kept
good.
giving me. Yeah, so and I tracked down the meeting ID number and then copied and pasted and
Oh,
then
wow.
somehow made it in. But yeah, glad to be here. Sorry I'm late.
No, I actually used the first few minutes to give people some ground rules so everyone feels safe and respected. And I'm so glad that you're speaking tonight, because I know I can just turn it over to your capable hands and let you run with it. So,
Well,
Mark.
well, yeah, you guys all anchor me with these, and so just what I want to make sure I follow the ground rules. What are the ground rules today?
You know what? You have never come close to breaking a ground rule, so it seems redundant, but essentially just don't be mean. I mean, it's pretty simple. Be respectful,
Okay,
don't be mean.
all
Yeah,
right.
right
Well,
on.
Okay, well, I'm thrilled to be here, and this essentially is the same presentation as I gave a while back, although it's going to be individual and unique, and I've got some things to lead with. But first thing I want to show you, this is my new favorite little thing. Okay, these are manatee postage stamps, and I wasn't looking for these. I went to buy postage for my office at the co-op, and those are what they handed me, and I was just thrilled. So, and I'm thrilled for today because as manatees spend their time in their waking hours traveling, investigating objects, and socializing by interacting with other manatees, let's proceed likewise in the spirit of the manatee. So here we are. I hope for this to be an interactive, free-form group conversation about individual experiences and shared phenomena of learning our autism, from which we may illuminate common and unique themes of autistic identity for sake of CASY's ethnography. And my future workshops will follow with the phases of acceptance, integration, and expression. So, today, welcome to DAIE, Autistic Identity Workshop 1, Discovery. And again, it's a privilege to be here. As always, gratitude to our CASY hosts. I'd like to begin with a brief invocation. Autos from the Greek is self. Ism from the Greek is being. Being experienced is state, condition, action, practice, intuition. AU is the chemical abbreviation for gold. To be oneself is golden. One may therefore know autism as a golden state. Condition, action, practice, intuition of being oneself. When I speak of autism, I speak in honor and recognition of unseen autistic elders passed on both sides of my family tree. When I speak of autism, I speak in appreciation of all autistics. Today, as in my last presentation, I'm adding a few personal recognitions to the Autism Discovery story that I've shared already. I recognize, as a white male raised Midwestern middle class, if Asperger's syndrome had entered the DSM long before 1994 when I turned 26, I would have been much more likely than minority children, female children, poor children to have received the benefit of an autism diagnosis. I recognize with an early diagnosis I could have been pathologized and modified. I recognize we are in a promising new era of autistic awareness and appreciation. I recognize as we enter this era, intersectional understanding of autism is critical. Here's my working model of autistic identity. Discovery, how and when we knew who and how we are. Acceptance, this is me. I've always been me. Now I can be more me. Integration, prismatic aspects gathered into a unique, expanding mosaic. Expression, giving myself to myself, sharing myself with the world. Sharing myself with the world is a way of giving myself to myself. Implicit in this process is the understanding that even as the model begins with discovery and expands to expression, whenever and however each of our autism was discovered, we had been expressing it already all along. Today, discovery. And once we get rolling, I'll share discovery themes that come up repeatedly for myself and with my clients and out of these workshops and my CASY conversations. The discovery inquiry, what is my autism story? Answer, this is my autism story. So let's go. At your leisure, as you feel free, tell us how and when you knew how and who you are.
Hey, Mark, I just want to jump in and say that since our numbers have grown so quickly and by such a margin, we've sort of been waiting for people to jump in at the end. But if you want to look for raised hands, go for it. If you want to be interactive. But again,
that's where we're at. Yeah, that's everything I had planned, and my hope for these workshops is that everybody can participate. That's what happened in the last one, and I was just thrilled for the participation, whether it's silent participation or participation in the chat or people sharing their stories, their thoughts. So yeah. So the raised hands. So I'm very unfamiliar with Zoom as a platform. I use a different platform for my practice. So am I the moderator here? Am I going to look for raised hands and call on people? Or are they going to show up somewhere else?
Mark, I'm going to
Yeah,
help you with that.
Oh, that would be so
yeah,
great.
you
Yeah,
have
so I'm definitely going to help you with that. And I was thinking, since we do have so many new folks here, uh, I was wondering, maybe would you be able to start us out, like maybe with a brief story of your own, and then once people hear that, then they may be able to figure out what give them some time to maybe figure out what they might want to say.
Yeah, I'd be glad to, and I'll try to keep it really brief. This is about autism discovery, and we can move around in this, but that's the focus of the day with the other phases that I've observed and identified to follow. So this is how and when I knew that I was autistic. Okay, and again, we knew all along, right? It's just that it was missed or it wasn't understood or we didn't know it implicitly. So my story, I discovered my autism in my 50s, okay, at age 50. My autism diagnosis occurred 2 days before I turned 51. It was my birthday present to myself. My discovery occurred in the context of a family situation, an autistic meltdown. It was late at night. My meltdowns typically mean just trying to get myself out of the space and if it's late, go to bed or just take care of myself. And the comment that came up after this around my struggles and my not apparently changing much in this particular dynamic from my at the time 11-year-old son, who gave me permission to share this in these presentations. I told him, I was like, I'm not going to tell him your name or anything. The question that came up for my kid, well, is dad autistic? Okay. And I went to bed. I woke up fitfully very early in the morning at dawn. I woke up to some links to articles about autism, stories about autism, a couple autism questionnaires. I took one glance at that and I wept, okay, with recognition. And the rest of that weekend, this was rolling into a weekend where there was a trip to Seattle, and it was just letting this sink in, absorbing it, researching like crazy, reaching out to people very close to me, friends and family members, and everything all of a sudden hit at once. So that's my autism, not my origin story, because that's from the very beginning, but my autism discovery story. And so many things came up around this. How could I not have known this? And I'll get to that and some of those themes at the end. How could I not have known? Or how could people have not known this about me? That's a much bigger part of the larger story. I chose a formal diagnosis and proceeded as soon as I could with that, with a psychologist who I knew professionally well enough to trust, but not well enough to have true overlap. And I went and got diagnosis within just a few weeks. Self-diagnosis is widely supported in the autism community. I don't believe that it's necessary for knowing or discovering our autism. I chose it just for the sake of my professional identity, because it became very clear that I need to, and I want to be out about this and transparent and not reinforce stigma. So I got a diagnosis to ground myself professionally, so that if somebody said you don't seem autistic, I could say, well, it's official. Nobody really said that, which was actually refreshing to me. And so then that's the discovery story. It unfolded for there. I'll leave it at that because that's a jumping off point. But if that sets the stage, like you were asking, Roger.
Well, that's great, Mark, because we have 4 raised hands.
Okay.
Let's start
Right.
with that. I think I'm going to start here with
It was great for me to launch into mine because I was researching autism because our then 8-year-old, one of our 8-year-old twins, was having a lot of difficulties, and I noticed a lot of traits that I'd known about autism for a long time, and discovered that a lot of the characteristics I recognized in my father, who passed away many years before that, seemed like autistic characteristics and were shared by my child. And then I figured out that if there's a genetic component, I was the link between the two. And then that was like at the time, crushing emotional realization. That was about 3 years ago, and I've been continuing on this journey of discovery since then.
What about your discovery? Details, epiphanies? I mean, it rundowns
So-
family trees, and this happens so often that those of us in this, I mean, everybody, you know, prior to Asperger's was a lost generation forever, but those of us who, you know, are living members of this lost generation, we see it in our kids and other family members, and then we realize it's ours as well. What else about that?
So one of the first things I learned is my absolute disgust and terror with the school system. Despite my own apparent success in it, was because of the way the school system was approaching teaching students who are autistic, and including our child. And so that helped explain a lot, and helped me understand a lot of what had happened when I was going to school. The genetic stuff was really interesting because I, in the course of this journey, reached out to some second cousins and realized that the common tree of my great-grandfather has like 20 autistic people in it. None of which we talked to each other about. It was all secret within each individual family because we were all ashamed of it. And that's actually brought me closer to some of those people than I ever was before. And it also helped me begin to accept my non-binary gender identity and many other things that's brought our family closer together. We now have 3 diagnosed autistics in our family. Me, that child, and then our teenage daughter also, we realized and proceeded to get a professional diagnosis for autism and ADHD. So it was very beneficial for us, but it was a real shock. And grappling with the idea of disability is a continued difficulty for me.
What happens, and this is for, you know, for anybody, and if I'm prompting or sharing a thought, that's not necessarily where the conversation needs to go or where I want it to go. But what happens when the shock wears off?
The several stages of grief for me.
Okay.
Yeah, Mark, I think I'm going to go down our list of hands here to see who else wants to answer or say something. I think if you wouldn't mind unmuting and speaking what you'd like to say.
My discovery happened last year, so exactly a year ago, October of last year. And it happened in the context of a lot of challenges in my relationships, in my family, and a lot of major life transitions that happened in the last few years, including moving from where I'm from to the US, being newly married, being in a blended family with a teenage stepdaughter, like just all the things happening at the same time. And that led to burnout. I started experiencing, you know, like lots of meltdowns and shutdowns, and I didn't have the language for it until the discovery. And so it was actually my wife who encouraged me to go and get a diagnosis. It wasn't a formal diagnosis, but it was an assessment by a neurodivergent therapist who, by the time I was going to meet with her, I'd already started doing research on my own and watching videos by other neurodivergent people, and immediately saw myself in the stories of others, and everything resonated, and it was shocking and sad, and also gave me the language So I went through all the stages, and I'm still going through all the stages, and I'm still experiencing the burnout, and it's, anger. I've been through therapy for so many years, angry with my therapist for not having identified this, nobody ever even mentioning neurodivergence to me. It's not a conversation that's happening that's for sure. I mean, it's very, very new. I think it's still a new conversation in many places. And so, yeah, it's had a huge impact on my mental health, just discovering so late. And yeah, here I am, still trying to figure out how to navigate life, and still navigating a lot of conflict and challenges in my relationships.
Yes. Yeah, and thanks for that. And it doesn't necessarily get easier, but it becomes more clear. And the state, and one of the reasons I'm excited about these workshops is that we can phenomenologically observe some of these themes that keep coming up. And I've got a few brief remarks at the end around the stages of grief as they apply to autism discovery. And already so far in today's workshop, people are reinforcing some of these themes that I've continued to observe. And then one thing that you said, that we don't have the language for it often until we start discovering it. And so when we discover it, we're discovering the language for it, and the means to talk about it, everything, the constructs, as we're discovering that it's how and who we are so very often, and that it's all happening at once. And somebody said something. I have a hard time keeping up with the chat and participating in the video at the same time. But all the things happening at the same time, and that's very much my experience and observation of the discovery phase. And all these things have been happening all the time at the same time already. We just have the language and the belonging, the experience, the shared experience. Thanks for that.
Great. Did you want to say something?
My discovery is pretty recent, like within the last 9 months. I think what happened is I turned 40 and had this moment where I was like, I'm going to be my most authentic self. Like, I've had enough of bending and breaking. And I think in retrospect, what accidentally happened is I unmasked in that quest to try and be my more authentic self. It was never caught with me, and I actually have not just anger, like fury about it, because I have bipolar type 1 and various other things, so I've been under the care of psychiatrists and therapists since I was 17 years old, and I work in mental health myself. So the idea that they didn't have the information, I didn't have the information to even identify what it was that I was struggling with. I actually used to choose not to work with the IDD population in my field because I felt that I couldn't relate to them in the same way that I could relate to other types of neurodivergencies. So I really thought I was so far out from it. My aha moment was actually watching Queen's Gambit, and the part where she moves the pieces around in her head. And I was like, I do that. Like, I do that. I rearrange furniture in my head, and I'd never been able to sort of explain that before. And then the term visual thinking was introduced, which led me down a whole path that sort of helped me realize that. So still a lot of fury and confusion. I ordered every book available about what I'm supposed to do now. And the thing that's most frustrating about me is I've had this clarity that I'm bending into an accordion to try and make relationships work, or to do what's needed, or get through meetings or whatever, when I can now identify that nobody else is even like bending a tiny little bit. And that's been what's taking up my therapy time for like the whole past year, because I don't know how to navigate how angry I get at no one understanding how hard I'm trying, even though I literally work in the field. So that's where I'm at. Thanks for listening.
A lot.
That's a lot. I think it's getting better in the field, even though, we're so, we have so far to go. And I think folks like yourself, are moving that in the direction, people who, you know, who are speaking about this and exploring it and sharing it. But back to Queen's Gambit, I really like that show. And one thing I observed with your discovery is, unless I'm mistaken, nowhere in that show did they ever mention autism. Yeah, okay. That you didn't need to know that this character was autistic to see yourself in how her brain worked to then make those connections. And it's that autistic affinity, that, you know, the that identity, that discovering, it's implicit. You knew it. You weren't watching a show about somebody who was, you know, an autistic chess genius, but we knew, you know, those of us who maybe knew we were autistic or understood autism, like, oh yeah, she's probably autistic. Okay, that when we see ourselves reflected, you saw yourself in that without even needing to know the, you know, the name for what you were seeing.
I'm very grateful for that because it also showed me that you can still be smart. You can still have skills. And then that led me to Temple Grandin's book, which shows like it can be seen as like a skill that no one else has, which I think really helped me avoid the sort of, oh my God, what's wrong with me part. So I'm very grateful that those different examples existed.
And another comment in the chat that the kids call it autistic coded, and yeah, and it's signaling, coding, absolutely, and it's really, I just find it really exciting to, you know, to discover this, and especially when we discover it and we see that that's really what's happening.
Great. Hey, would you like to go next?
Sure, I'll go next. So, for me, my autism journey, it's been a rough one, because I've been somebody who's gone through the mental health system, who's been hospitalized in psychiatric hospital, inpatient, and partial hospitalizations for multiple times, and I've been on multiple medications. Didn't know why I was feeling the way I was feeling and what was really going on. And you know, I've had my struggles through university, trying to go through school and keep up with the social atmosphere as well as the academics, and you know, struggling, and took several years. Wasn't diagnosed with anything until after I graduated. But my epiphany came really with my neuropsychological evaluation that I recently had about 4 or 5 months ago. And the clinicians did a phenomenal job just observing and doing the tests and doing the MIGDAS too, and trying to understand my sensory experiences and my autistic traits. I'm so grateful. And now I'm trying to read and learn all I can about autism and give back and help other people with support groups. Because I live with chronic conditions, you know, psychosis, depressive psychosis, and now I just want to help other people understand that they're, you know, they aren't alone. They're not alone with their mental health or realizing that they're autistic. And once you understand what's going on, it's like a light switch flips on, and you can finally get the help you need, and you can find your community where there are autistic people. It's so wonderful.
And that's, I mean, that is the full circle. That's the full circle healing from the trauma of being undiscovered or wrongly discovered or poorly discovered. Is that our suffering, okay, can be redeemed in the sharing and the understanding with others.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Great. Would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Hi, my name is. Sorry, I'm like freaking out because I saw my video. Okay, I found my video again. I was like, I think I put on my video. Okay, sorry. My name. I use they them pronouns. My autistic discovery started 17 years ago, I would say, when I was 21. I was in undergrad and studying education, and I was in a human development class. And I read kind of for the first time about what was then described as Asperger's, and I was like, oh, so that's what my deal is. And at the time, I was like, I was in like a good place at the time, so it's kind of like I left it there. It was just kind of like, oh, this is just another way for me to like make sense of myself and another description of me. And I didn't seek a diagnosis or anything like that at the time. And then as I kind of got into adulthood, I have found difficulties with finding like a career and just dealing with being on teams and that sort of thing, and making sense of office politics, and eventually actually switched careers a couple times. I was a teacher for 2 years, then I worked in tech for like over 10 years, and then just recently I actually have gone back to school. I decided that I think this is something that a lot of you have already kind of spoken to, of the feeling of being in the mental health system and having other co-occurring conditions and having the autism be lost. And that's actually something I've experienced, and has inspired me to go back to school to become a clinical psychologist. And then kind of I already feel like so affirmed. This is like my first time attending one of these, but what Mark said about seeking a formal diagnosis because of the professional side of things and wanting to be able to be out with that label. I actually did just in September get a formal diagnosis. I went and went through that whole process and got to see what it was like on one side of things before I, at some point, hopefully, am providing that for other people. So that's kind of, I guess, logistically what my discovery has been like. As I mentioned, kind of starting out, my first reaction to it was more just like, oh, things make sense, and this is like an interesting thing to learn about. And then the further I got into it, there have definitely been times when it has been hard. I think one of the hardest things for me was understanding, realizing that I do have, especially when I was younger, situational mutism, and just a lot of anger with that because my parents would just be mad at me and be like, why won't you? My mom would just be like, why won't you confide in me, when it was that when I would get upset, I just couldn't talk. And I would have to deal with her being like, why do you think I'm a bad mom that you can't tell me things? Instead of like realizing that there was something going on that was making it so that I couldn't talk. And eventually she'd usually get to the point of like finally asking me like yes or no questions, and I could nod my head sometimes. But just the realization of how much of if the identification of the autism and then an understanding of it and how to work with it would have made such a difference for me as a child with something like that. So there are moments like that where I like reevaluate things from my past, understanding how the autism may have played into it, that like it's helpful to know but also hard. So yeah, but I'm excited to, like, I'm glad I have a formal diagnosis now, and I'm really interested to hear everyone's perspectives on like just the interaction between like other mental health things and autism, because that's my area of interest. So, thanks.
I'll just add in the space. Once we have our discovery experience, we have the freedom whether it's with a formal diagnosis or not, we have the freedom to care for that and to care for ourselves. And that's at whatever point we get it. I think that's the beauty of it. And that there's just, I found that the wishing I could have had it sooner, the second guessing doesn't help. And I think that, I said this before, but that we those of us who aren't diagnosed or weren't able to get diagnosed young, we're able somehow to care for ourselves and protect ourselves and shelter ourselves up to the point at which we were able to fully discover it. And I think sometimes, depending on where we were in history or culturally, the early discovery, the early diagnosis could have added trauma to the simple trauma of being misunderstood or having struggles with attachment.
Great. So let's move down. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, so I was formally diagnosed about 3 years ago at the age of 37. I chose to seek formal diagnosis during a time I essentially had to leave my job of 14 years, what was a dream job for me, because some other folks were hired in and um, we just couldn't seem to relate with each other, and the office politics destroyed me, and so I essentially had to leave what I thought was going to be my job for my life, and it was very traumatizing, and so I took that opportunity to kind of quote prove or whatever that something is different about me. It was during COVID had just started, and it was kind of a hard process for me to get the diagnosis. First, I had to petition my psychiatrist to send me to another person who could give me the diagnosis. And then that person, his process was that he had to interview my mother as well. And I haven't been talking to my mom for over 20 years and have a bad relationship with her. So I kind of sucked up like, okay, all right, and then got diagnosed. I since have recently started with another nurse practitioner who has, and I'm examining whether or not I have ADHD as well. And he's given me some tests that just like are less traumatic for me and have the autism all over the place. Um, and so for me, one of the things was I knew I was different for a good chunk of my life, and I've been asking my parents, and they would say that I'm fine, and I'm like, okay, I might be, just as good of a person or whatever, and something's different, y'all. Um, and so it was, but my parents weren't to talk to me about it. I called up my old speech pathologist, who was my best friend's mother, and she wouldn't say anything. I've been in therapy for 20 years at that point, and no one has had me pinged for even remotely being autistic. Um, I am thrilled that I have quote found like I'm now aware of the autism community and this aspect of my life and this aspect of who I am and have words to pitch to it. I am still struggling in the area of figuring out what that means for how I think, how I process, and how I can communicate with others my needs, or what would support me. So like when I'm essentially being asked to leave another job that I've had for 3 years, because of office politics. And I'm looking for another job and just trying to figure out how do I articulate, um, what I need. How do I know for myself what I need, and how do I articulate that to other folks who might not be, neurodivergent friendly, um, or aware. So.
And critical of that, you kind of answered my question about what happens when you've always known that you're different or unique. We've always known that we're different and unique. What happens when we understand that we really are unique in these ways, okay, and that we can communicate that? You answered the question, which I really appreciate.
But it gives us, do you understand?
The language, for sharing that. And of course, your parents. I mean, this is the problem, and this is one of the reasons that therapists and psychologists and medical providers sometimes are reticent to explore autism, is because there's this idea that nobody wants to lay that on anybody. Okay, you don't want to be the one to tell somebody their kid's autistic, and that's the stigma. And then there's the self-stigma and the internalization of that. Okay, but for those of us who have this experience, yeah, you knew all along that you were different. And your parents, had they understood it, might have been more able to work with you, but it's scary. And that's what we're overcoming.
Yep. Thanks.
We have 7 more hands raised, so we're gonna see if we can get through people who want to share. Would you like to go next? I'm sorry, not.
Hey, sorry, my dog might bark. There we go. He's not. I'm also very recently diagnosed. I got a formal diagnosis like a month ago, and I only started really exploring this seriously maybe like 10 or 11 months ago, a little bit after that. I was in a PhD program for psychology, studying childhood trauma prevention, and I had such horrible, now I know, was such just horrible autistic burnout. I ended up leaving the program due to a variety of factors, but part of it was like being hospitalized and not being able to really do anything for a year, because I was just so zoinked out. So after leaving, my sister at the same time had been going through a lot of like mental health stuff on her end, and she talked to me about how her therapist thought that she might be autistic. And so then I started reading a bunch of stuff about autism because I was like, oh, I want to support my sister. I'll start reading about this. And then I was like, oh, this is me too. Yeah, and I guess I don't know. Not always, but for a while, I had thought that my sister might be autistic, because she has a lot more of the like kind of like stereotypical, more like apparent symptoms of autism that you might see. Though again, she also like wasn't diagnosed and still doesn't have a formal diagnosis. So I was like, well then I can't, like I don't have it because I don't have all of these like super like, again kind of stereotyped or like more like culturally present in the media, um symptoms of autism. And only after actually delving into literature and articles and blog posts written by autistic by autistics, I was like, oh, my understanding of autism was so narrow, and also I think I am also autistic. um, so yeah, similar to a lot of people, like at first it was like it felt it felt like really good to be validated. It was painful, but a good kind of painful to be validated. And I'm now kind of reaching a point where I'm struggling more with this identity and kind of recognizing where um where I kind of feel disabled in the world, and feeling a lot of kind of anger and frustration with kind of the systems around me, and that they don't make sense, and that there's nothing I can really do about it as an individual without putting myself um in a lot of risk. I mean, I need almost didn't even like come to this because I was like, oh, I don't want people. What if somebody finds me? I don't know, at my work. So it's just, yeah, it's just hard.
Yeah, and this is that for all of the relief and the epiphanies and the belonging. I mean, it gets so much better, and it's wonderful, and it's multifaceted, and it gets harder. It gets harder because we're so aware of what we've known but didn't know. Okay, we're aware of how we've been struggling and working and masking and accommodating. Okay, and then people around us often are like, well, it's getting worse, right? You figured out you're autistic, now you're supposed to get better. Okay, well, you're not getting better because I've been masking. I'm tired of that. Okay,
Yeah, I've been struggling with that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let myself be more autistic or relax into that. Okay, I'm not gonna hide it. I'm not gonna mask it. Okay, I'm gonna take care of myself, or maybe ask for some accommodations reasonably, and then it looks like we're getting worse. Okay, and it's simultaneously getting harder as we're working to make it better for ourselves. Yeah, and ultimately, I mean, I'm 5 years, I'm 5.5 years out, and it really does get better. And I think all of us, I mean, we're probably, each and every one of us is a truth seeker, right? And if you're seeking the truth about yourself, okay, it does make everything better.
Great.
And we're all reflecting each other here. It's reflected here.
I have my hand up because I can never figure out the icon, sorry. So I just wanted to riff on that and make it clear that almost pretty well, maybe everyone I've talked to in the program has not been mad about being autistic. Like once we get immersed in this culture, and it is a culture, a way of being, and we're talking to other people who get that just naturally, then yeah, the grief and anger that comes up is generally, from what I've heard from people around that, it's that that you have this entire new lens on your entire life, and
Yeah.
ways you were treated and things you missed out on, the pain you went through unnecessarily. But what makes it better for people to come full circle is this immersion in autistic culture, because it's validating in a way that nothing else in the world.
Great. I'm going to just shift to the chat for a minute here. A couple comments in the chat, but I think maybe some might want to speak as well. I see your comment. Did you want to say something, or would you like me to? I can just read your comment aloud if you prefer. Okay, I'm just going to read it briefly here. It says, I went and got diagnosed a few years ago at 48 years old. I always knew I was different and suspected autism for several years prior. I also was prepared for people to say I did not seem autistic, yet did not know that it did not happen. I found this both comforting and disconcerting. I think, Mark, in one of your prior talks, you had talked about um, people having that reaction.
Yeah, and I'm looking for the chat so I can read it again as well. Absolutely, and that where we find ourselves if we're not careful is, I mean, we're grappling with this and learning it, and then having to help other people along and explain everything, often at our own expense, and that we can't be, you know, that we can't simultaneously, and this is true of any minority, that we can't simultaneously be the ambassador, you know, for ourselves and our needs as we're doing our own healing. And that and most people mean well, but the confusion, or you're not, and they're trying to make you feel better, or they're not comfortable with it, or the skepticism or the misunderstanding, words that people use regularly start to mean something differently. Yeah.
Great. I'm going to go back to the hands now. Would you like to say something?
Hi. Yes, thank you. My discovery is fairly recent also. I'm 3 years old and was formally diagnosed a year and 2 months ago. Again, similar to everyone else's stories, I always knew something was different. Started seeking answers to why I went from being, and I'm sure that this is something that everyone else heard also, a gifted child to then struggling once I got into high school. So by the age of 15, my parents had brought me to the therapist, and I didn't really get a formal diagnosis then. Getting into college and not having, you know, somebody guiding me, forcing me to focus and do things the right way, I struggled even more. I had what I now know is a meltdown for the first time in front of someone else. And that person brought me to the school infirmary and said it was a nervous breakdown. And they diagnosed me with bipolar, manic depressive, they said back then, and wanted me to be hospitalized, which I refused. The bipolar thing followed me for many years because when you go to a therapist and you say you've been diagnosed once with something, they just start from there a lot of times. So that just became sort of my diagnosis if I was working with somebody. Um, and of course, the bipolar manic stuff. Now I have to laugh instead of crying over it because the question: do you ever talk to somebody very rapidly and you start to see the look on their face change? They want to get away, but you keep talking, and I'm going, that happens all the time. And now I know that it was only my special interest that I talked like that about. But they didn't give that caveat. Um, I my special interest is animal behavior and communication, and so I am quite obsessed with learning about specifically my dogs, my cats, and it was I adopted a dog who is different than any I'd ever dealt with before, and so as I was deep diving into what may be going on with her, I started to learn things about sensory processing disorders, and she panics with certain noises. And the strange thing is I started to really identify with her. And as I was joining all of these workshops with professional dog trainers and behaviorists and neuroscientists, and I'm just, looking into the stuff for my own dog, they said that they are developing a checklist for a highly sensitive dog. And I said, oh my gosh, that's so strange, because that was something that a therapist had brought up to me in 2007, was that I fit a criteria for a highly sensitive person. And a friend of mine in academia said, you may want to read about, you know, female autism, how autism manifests for women. And that was the first time I started to really look into it. My husband is autistic, so I thought I knew. And he would joke and tell me, you're at least autistic adjacent. It was but I had to also get a formal diagnosis. I needed to know. So I did go for the evaluation, and it took me only a week between, like, do I come out with this? Do I say? And I was so angry about everything that I didn't, like going back through my life. So not only did I come out at work and to my sisters and my family where there's a lot of neurodivergence in the family, I also started in neurodiversity ERG at work and lead that. And it took a few months before we had the first, it was mostly people ADHD and anxiety, but we finally had another autistic person, and I also have ADHD, and so did he, and I just felt like I found my people. Everything just sort of synced up. I do want to also address something about what happens after the grief and the shock and all the rest of it. True to myself, I thought, I finally know what's wrong. Now I can fix it. I had this period of time where I thought I could control it, where I thought, now that I know what's wrong, I can stop it. I'm going to cry thinking about it. It was a hard time. It was a very hard time until I embraced it and said, it's okay to have these reactions. And it's okay to have, things that I used to think made me a bad person, like a reaction, like a rage reaction to certain noises or smells, to needing to see things in order. And I thought that made me a bad person. I don't change it. I'm recognizing why I feel that way, and I'm actually starting to love that I have this quality to me, because what I can bring to the world in this, I'm an executive assistant. I bring order to chaos for people. I have helped people to learn self-advocacy and to take something and figure out how to organize, put your thoughts together, and how to speak up for yourself. I am now looking into becoming a neurodiversity coach. I really want to help other young women, especially, to avoid some of the very tricky things that I went through in my life, not knowing what was going on with me. We can be very vulnerable out in the world. There's definitely a lot of PTSD. But yeah, I hope nobody else had that part of the experience after their diagnosis, though, and it's something definitely to avoid. Now I can make it stop part. That was hard, and I'm glad to be coming out of it.
I think a lot of us had that experience.
Yeah.
And I would
I'm
even,
sorry.
Well, and this is it's all a part of it, right? And we're that we're here and we're sharing our stories and feeling understood and feeling felt. That's what brought us here. And I think, a lot of us had that experience, with the intensity that you had. Probably most of us, had some of that experience, and it's the growth through and the movement through that, that validates the suffering. And yeah, I'm just, I have to run. I bumped back to 4:05 for my next appointment, so I have to run. I've got a couple remarks just to kind of close the loop here. Where should we go, Roger? Do we want to? We could keep going. I love that,
Sure.
even if time's running out, or at least
Sure.
for me.
I think, maybe what you can do, Mark, is if you wanted to give your closing remarks, and I think if folks are wanting to stay on, I'm sure Donna's probably more than happy. I'm certainly more than happy to stay on if that's something people want to do.
Yes.
I love that idea. Yeah, I love that idea. That we're all rolling. Yeah, so that'd be great if everybody can keep going. So this is this is what I love about this sharing, is the themes that I've observed personally and in my social relationships and in my practice that they're coming up here, and this happened last time. So now just to sharing what, what has come up as far as themes, some of these themes that we're reinforcing today. Yes, finally. Relief. What if people don't believe me? This explains everything. What do I do now? And there are so many more. These are just some of the themes that I've observed at a glance, okay? And then concluding with the autism discovery stages of grief and growth, as I've observed them, much different than the stages of grief as we've learned and apply these otherwise. Denial. It's not aversive or this can't have happened typically, but more like it's too good to be true. Oh no, what if it's not true? Or just another dead-end disappointment? Autistic denial. Bargaining. Could this be something else? Am I kidding myself? Anger. Why couldn't someone, somewhere, somehow have shown me this a long damn time ago? Am I a fool for only figuring this out finally now? Depression. Yes, it must be true. I must be autistic. It really must be true. I am autistic. I am so exhausted. Acceptance is going to be the next workshop. And then understanding that grief and growth do not ultimately stay put in acceptance, but flourish in a capacious renewal of joy, deeper and more enduring for sake of the meaning made in our grieving and growing process. And I'll leave the closing thoughts to the rest of you to hang out. But yeah, I mean, thanks for making meaning here today. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Mark. As always, you really bring out the best in people.
Mm.
You're good at what you do, my friend.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, and thanks to everybody. Really, really appreciate it. Take care. See you again, hopefully.
Yes, we'll
All
see
right.
you again soon, I hope, Mark.
Bye.
All right, see you soon. Yes, so as I was discussing earlier before everybody joined, I am so tired. I can barely function, but I love this so much, and this is where my heart is. So I'm happy to stick around as long as I don't fall over. And Roger's been wonderful helping today, as usual. And I think pretty much anybody we could probably open it up to anyone at this point. Everyone is welcome. I just want to make that clear, that whether you're formally identified or if you are identified by context where you think, thing, of course, everybody's welcome here, and allies are most welcome here. Appreciate your support for sure. So please, everybody, take your turn.
I just wanted to start with first, and then they had their hands up for a while. Did you want to go?
Sure, if it's not weird, are we still doing discovery stories?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Okay, alright, sorry. So basically, I always had an idea that I was different from other people, but I thought it meant that I was bad. That I was like below everybody else in some way that I couldn't quite pinpoint. And I was very mentally ill for like my entire adolescence. Um, really suicidal. I almost died of anorexia, which I've come to understand is kind of not too uncommon for girls with autism. Um, I got better, went to college, and then my best friend, like from childhood, said that they were thinking of autism for both of us, and I had a very narrow point of view at that point, so I was like, no, that's preposterous. And then a couple of years passed, and I noticed, all of my friends are autistic. That can't be an accident. Like this. So I started doing some reading and some research, and I kind of gave myself like the idea that I had like the Schrodinger's autism. Like, like maybe it's true, but it's probably just an excuse for how I'm fundamentally flawed. I want an excuse for that. So we'll shelf that. Got to grad school. This was 3 years ago now. That same best friend, who's still my best friend, got diagnosed formally. And they came and told me it was a mind-bending experience and that I should see for myself. And at that point, I was like, probably, yeah, I did it. And it was indeed a very mind-bending experience, and it was kind of the first time I ever felt understood by a psychologist in my life, which was really interesting. Um, I I'm also a scientist myself. Like I'm currently doing a doctorate in biology. I study animals and genomics, and so I kind of just wanted to chat with the psychologist for a really long time about it. Um, she gave me a reading list though, and actually that really helped. It resonated with me. I read Songs of the Gorilla Nation, which as an animal person, um, that definitely clicked for me. I started talking to my mom about it. Growing up, I didn't have a very good relationship with her, but once she started reading about autism, she realized that she has autism and ADHD herself. And now we're extremely close because we actually know how to talk to each other. Um, it's so lovely just having this culture automatically with a group of people that, like, for instance, I went to Ireland last year and I met two people and just became friends with them for the night, met them separately. Found out only a couple weeks ago both were autistic. And it's crazy to me that this kind of thing transcends borders, that we can just instantly click and understand each other at such a deep level. Um, just the sensitivity to all things.
That's so perfectly put, the sensitivity to all things. We have a relational culture that doesn't have those hard lines between self and other, self and environment, self and animal. I mean, in fact, that's one of the reasons I insisted that we include animal cognition and ways of life in this program, because there are so many similarities. What you said was so beautiful. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Great, and I also emphasize the fact that this is all borderless, and I think that's such a unique feature that we've been learning along the way. Great. Now, did you want to say something?
There. I was trying to find the unmute button. I had to make it pop up. I'm here. Yes, I was diagnosed finally at 71, and that was the most liberating time of my life. Absolutely. I was, how I came to it was about maybe 10 years ago. I had picked up Aaron Lycan's book, Finding Kansas, and he was like a flag man for the NASCAR or the big car races, and he lived up in Kansas, and he's described safe places and unsafe places where you could function or not function. And the title of the book, Finding Kansas, is like if you cross the border into Kansas, everything functions, and then you go back to unsafe Missouri. Nothing works anymore. You might be mute, which I was many different situations for like a couple of years at one school, though I was a young Sheldon bright student, you know. And then so as soon as I was diagnosed, when I read that Likens, I knew exactly he explained my life exactly. So as soon as I got the diagnosis, I went gung ho. We have Autism Oklahoma. I go to last week. I went to 2 Halloween parties: Autism Oklahoma, Autism Foundation of Oklahoma. The first one was young adults out at an open place outside the bar, and all variations, but some more my age. Of course, I'm the oldest, you know. But and then the one I went to Saturday was the whole a big large area, and they went from goes from the nonverbal to so-called mild case. And this has helped me unmask so much. The masking, it causes so much anxiety and PTSD. It got ungodly, unbelievable in my early life. My I made it through because I found a safe place here and there. But I couldn't do. I was highly educated, but I ended up working, and I had to go back to doing union carpentry. And finally, I was a Oklahoma City bus driver because I could deal with the street people. That's a different culture, you know. The lights and the labs and offices and stuff that didn't work right. I want to do my young life really quick. Uh, some of that before I did all the shutdowns. That all come later in my teens and up in my 20s. It gets worse, you know. But when I was about 3 years old, I was raised in southwest Oklahoma, a little Indian town. And my dad took me to the doctor at 3 years old. I would not play with the kids. I had no interest in the kids. I wasn't shy of them. They were very chaotic, you know. And then in school, I started noticing I got I was pretty bright, but I spare played on the playground and stuff. The first 3 years, we lived in the Jim Crow era, so we had black school and white school, but the Native Indians could go to our school. Well, the first 3 years, I wouldn't play with the white kids, but I was achieving great academically. But I would spare play, and then like my third grade year, the little Indian boys in the shack town next to me started pestering me to play with them, and I played with them. And then fourth grade, I didn't ask my parents. I didn't say goodbye to the mostly white school. I got on my bicycle and registered at the mostly Indians grade school, and I was totally social and functional with those boys. They don't look at different oddities, you know, like in the other school, mostly whites. I wasn't. There was a black school too, and we lived between that Indian shack neighborhood and a black neighborhood, and strict Jim Crow we did not associate, which I regret my whole life. I know everything about Jim Crow, but and then we moved to Arkansas to a little Jim Crow town down there, and there was just a few students, and they took me in. Then in high school, we moved to Michigan. I was high academics, and it was the home of the Dow Chemical Company, a huge high school. I was mute for 2 years. I don't think I ate lunch with one student there, but I love the countryside. But I made it through though somehow. I'm doing really good now. Unmasking, I couldn't. When I got diagnosed, I knew the first thing I needed to do was unmask, and just being with the others from the nonverbal all the way up. And I've got sometimes 1 or 2 gatherings a week. I'm really lucky. That's the very best thing for me. I learned to unmask. Plus, I was in a church choir that there was a very autistic man closer to my age, and then a boy like 20 flapping like crazy in the choir. And if we're having a social, he paces back and forth and flaps. He's brilliant. He tutors at his college and stuff, but his mother is she taught special ed. She wouldn't have him diagnosed. That's good in a way because, well, when I was growing up in Oklahoma in the 60s, I worked in high school in a nursing home where they warehoused autistic and Down syndrome kids all together, like 100, and some not potty trained, full of psychotic drugs. And some they were starting to diagnose some of them autistic then, and all that, and they would. I would have not accepted that, like he was talking about earlier. I wouldn't have accepted it earlier. That would have been. I had to come to it. So I'm good right now. I want to help the next generation not suffer all that PTSD and super anxiety. You get to masking. You get to watching every movement, even unconsciously. You can just become a zombie and acting like I'm enjoying life and maybe function. Some can't do that. I did somehow. And I had a safe place. I had a husband for 40 years. He helped me through my worst times. He was severely ADHD, and he's departed 4 years ago before my diagnosis. His sister verified he's severely ADHD the other couple weeks. I'm good. I hope to help with this. and learn something.
I'm so proud of you. We have a solid core of elders. I personally think that anyone from the lost generations is an elder from about 45-ish up. I'll let you know when those support groups are going to meet. And I'm also sorry to hear about your husband.
We've got 3 or 4 of my age have started coming to one of the groups. You know, a lot of these groups are like 20s, 30s. Especially the ones. And I couldn't get when I read Lycan's book, I couldn't get a diagnosis for 10 years. But then finally, they found you couldn't find adult diagnosis. So I knew exactly. If I was not diagnosed, I would be devastated because I know everything that happened to me in my life and how I reacted to the lights and social stimuli and how I became mute. How I could, one period, I couldn't even go to a restaurant because I thought everybody was watching every move. That's what masking does to you. We got to stop that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so counterproductive, right? I mean, we all agree.
It's got to be.
It turns you into a zombie.
Half of this has to be teaching the general society because I read this article. They studied these people and they, the typical people within like 6 seconds or in just a few seconds, they decide whether they want to socialize anymore with or engage with the autistic person anymore. So, but if they are informed, and then it stays, they will not associate anymore. But if it's explained to them, it's a different reaction. So it's not all us. It's got to be. We can't therapy all of us. The whole educational system has to be accommodating.
Right.
It's known as the double empathy problem. If you have a social problem, then it takes 2 people to have that social problem. And that's something that, you know, this program is all about. And I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to be sure as time's cross.
Yeah, I'm oversharing.
Not at all. Please don't take that away.
I love
Can
what
I
you're
say one
saying.
thing?
It's impossible to overshare in this group.
You said about elders, and I'm really close to the tribe. And one of my sisters retired in Indian childhood trauma, and her mother-in-law prayed for us, and she's one of the 13 international indigenous grandmothers. I'm so blessed. Well, you were talking about elders.
Yeah,
I think it's common for us to really resonate with other relational people. You know, cultures that get it, that things aren't separate. So, does anybody else have anything they want to share?
Yeah, I better stop. I better unmute.
thank you so much.
So, thank you for that. Did we have any more hands, Roger?
All right, I'm looking real quick. I don't see any hands, but if you want to say something, you can also say in the chat that you'd like to speak up and unmute yourself. Actually, you can just unmute yourself and start talking at this point.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. You know, it's always like mind blowing to me when I stumble upon these kind of like sessions, and it's usually this group, right? But you know, just like how much we all relate to each other coming out of like nowhere. It's like somebody's been reading your mail, as they say, right, with your diaries and whatnot. So, you know, thank you guys so much. And particularly thank you for sharing, not oversharing at all. I put in the chat, but you know, I feel like I could listen to you talk all day. I feel like I've known you my whole life, you know, even like your mannerisms and stuff. But you know, just I don't know, it feels like family. So, I said in the chat as well. I said, I think that my grandfather is autistic. He probably, you know, passed away not knowing himself. Like my mother was as well. She probably also passed away not knowing who she was. So, you know, I don't know. I just feel such a comfort, you know, listening to you talk. So thank you so much. Anyway, yeah, God bless. Bless you. Yeah, I'm so thankful. I'm blessed. late in life, if I'd learned it earlier and could accept it, you know, yeah, and I could get through a lot of different. It's not going to be 100%, but I could sure do a lot. I had to drive a mail truck for 8 or 10 years before I could be alone, you know, and I've got all this education and union carpenter and everything else because I could function. So. I believe it. Thank you. Well, thank you. It's amazing, and I can't imagine. I think with every generation, probably gets a little bit better, and it sounds like we're doing exponentially better now. You know, but you know, it was a difficult. Like I've been in the workforce for like 13 years. You know, when I graduated after my second master's, right, where I was kind of, you know, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I couldn't, you know, deal with like the social aspects of all of it. You know what I mean? Like the office politics, like somebody else was saying, just absolutely killed me. So it's like I got out of school and then finally went to go to work at being dropped in the Shark Tank is the way that one of the psychologists here put it really well. So anyway, I forgot what I was saying, but yeah, damn ADHD. I don't know. The drugs have worn off by now, you know, the Adderall, so I can't. I forgot what I was saying, but anyway, just thank you so much. God bless. Take care, and like you say, I'll stop rambling on.
You know, all of our core members who've been here for a while know that I get weepy at least once during the session, and certainly feel that way now. It's so moving to me that people, after everything, are still open-hearted. It's inspiring, and I'm glad we're here to protect each other. I hope everybody continues to come back. We've got our social media, our Facebook pages, both the CASY Facebook page and Roger's original Facebook page, the website, the YouTube channel, and playlist. So we'll be putting all that where people can get to it. And just, sorry, there was some reverb there. So yeah, just keep coming back. Look at what we're doing. Look at the things that are coming up. We schedule things pretty far in advance, but then sometimes we have things that come right up. So follow, so we can all stay connected.
I'll try talking for just a second. Is this a regular? I just stumbled upon your Facebook page and all that. Is this a regular meeting? Like what you're doing here today?
Yeah, great question. So essentially what we do is we have just started this year having a combination of the support groups we're trying to start. We have hangouts for special, passions. I'm doing a physics group regularly starting later this month. And again, if I forgot, we're doing the support groups for all kinds of people. That's just taking off now. But we often have people just come and speak once about their special area of interest, whether it's telling their life story or sharing some expertise in something. And you're always bound to learn something if you come to any of them.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I'll keep an eye on the Facebook page, I guess, then for that upcoming new things. Thank you.
Okay, great, everyone. So I think our next, well, all our events are on the meetup site, so they'll always be on there, but also on the Facebook groups. You'll often see direct links to the actual meetings, Zoom meetings. So that doesn't necessarily require an RSVP if you access the meeting through the private Facebook groups. But everything is always going to be on the meetup page. So if you need one place to see it all, you'll see it there. But there's Facebook alternative, and we also share stuff on almost like a dozen different social media platforms. So yeah, we know everyone has different preferences, and we're trying to meet people where they are. So thanks very much, everyone, and hope to see you all again.
Thank you, Roger. Thanks for your help today.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.